Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this month's Tamil Innovators Spotlight. The Tamil Innovators Spotlight is an online series which puts the spotlight on individuals from the global Tamil community who are building great products, services, and initiatives. Our latest event is brought to you in partnership with mystartupdojo.com and tamilculture.com. And by the way, before we get into things, if you like free things, you're definitely going to want to stick around till the end. We have some really cool surprises lined up for you. So I see some people are streaming in. It's awesome. Before we get into things, I'd love to introduce myself. My name is Angelina Rainthorn, and I am so excited to be your host this evening. I'm program director at mystartupdojo.com, host of the Young at Heart podcast, and 2 times robotics world champion. I founded my first venture when I was 15, and now I'm committed to spreading that spirit of entrepreneurship with other young people through Startup Dojo and through this amazing series. Now, without further ado, I'm so excited to welcome our featured guest speaker this evening, Abarna Raj. She's the CEO of Palmera.org. Abarna is a lawyer by training, and she started her career as a social strategy consultant at PricewaterhouseCoopers, working with companies to create shared value by aligning social impact with overarching business strategy. Since then, she's led the sustainability portfolio at Leighton, Australia's largest construction and mining services company. From this, she continued her passion for social strategy consulting at Social Ventures Australia, broadening her clientele to government or agencies and nonprofits. And in 2014, Abarna co-founded Palmera. Palmera is an amazing development agency that works in Sri Lanka to help vulnerable families earn a living income. And today we're going to be exploring her story and journey building this incredible organization. Thank you so much, Abarna, for being with us this evening.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so let's jump right into this. Before we get into things, let's talk a bit more about Palmera. How did it begin? And what's the mission behind what you're doing? What inspired it all?
Well, Palmera began when I was in my final year of uni, and we had gone back to Sri Lanka to learn about our roots and our identity. And while we were there, the Boxing Day 2004 tsunami had hit, and we were in the midst of disaster. And as someone just about to start my career, it completely changed my outlook on life. I was all set to become an investment banker, maybe, earn a lot of money. And, my perspective just started to change. It took me a while to eventually do Palmera, but Palmera began with the initial group of people who were there, who saw it and who realized that we could do something to contribute at that time. It then kind of moved in from a volunteer organization in 2014, as you said, to a kind of a startup where we a couple of us quit our jobs and, went all in on the organization. And the mission is really about helping vulnerable people earn a living income. We're really passionate about giving people the means so that they can stand on their 2 feet and kind of live the way that they want to live, not waiting for the next handout or kind of living a life of dependency. So accelerating pathways to a living income is what we're really passionate about. And that's not an easy thing to achieve. It's multi-dimensional barriers that we have to solve for, but that's the ultimate goal that we're seeking to do.
Right. So tell me more about, you mentioned that there are various barriers that you need to go through before reaching your end goal. So tell me a bit more about what that looks like. What are the specific problems that you're dealing with on the ground, and how does Palmera work to overcome them?
Well, the challenges, really depends on the context that you're in, but in the post-war areas that we work, of course, we're dealing with trauma, we're dealing with areas that don't have proper services so people can start up their businesses, whether it's government extension services or buyers. There's a lack of, people are displaced, they're coming back to communities that they don't know their neighbors. When we think of a village, we think everyone knows everyone and everyone's been around for a long time. But these are displaced communities. They're displaced for 20 years. They're coming back to areas that they don't know their neighbors. There's a lot of fear. There's still authority presence in a political context that people maybe don't feel as safe. So all these things create challenges for people to work together, and working together is really important to make your business successful in a rural context. Farmers need to aggregate their products in order to sell it to big businesses or to sell it to big wholesalers. They're not doing that. So as a result, they're getting poor price. They are using old practices from the 1960s and 1970s. So they're not increasing their yield. So these are just a few of the many barriers, the social and the market barriers that kind of come together which lead to women and families not being able to earn the types of incomes that they could otherwise earn. And of course, capital, there's no money. But more than having no money, there's maybe access to money, but maybe no knowledge in how to reach the right capital sources. So people are charging really high interest rates. There's no financial literacy. There's no safe ways to save. So the barriers are endless. And for us, it's about systematically looking at the whole thing and figuring out how to target that. So at the end of the day, a woman can have a business, can earn an income, and can put food on the table for her children.
Right, that's fascinating. So you mentioned looking at it holistically and trying to attack it that way. What are some of the key problem areas which Palmera addresses, and how do you do that?
So what we found is it's important for us to go into what we call a last mile area, an area that's underserved, where there is a lot of vulnerable people. And we then work in that whole area for 5 years. So there may be between 500 to 3,000 people in that area. And we work with all the groups and we understand what are the businesses that you're trying to start and what are the barriers that you face, not just the market barriers, but also the social barriers that you face in order to get to those business opportunities. So sometimes it might be we don't have knowledge on these areas. It may be we don't have capital, but it may also be as a woman, we don't feel safe to go to that area to access those buyers. Or it may be someone with a disability saying, we don't have that mobility. And so by being there for 5 years and systematically working through not just one, but many different business options, we can kind of work with that whole area to rejuvenate that ecosystem. And what we found in communities where we've now done that for years is that, the dairy sector, before no one was working in dairy, and now there's a booming dairy sector. There's booming agricultural sector. When we went into these villages, there was only 10% of their land was used. Now we have 90% of these areas being used because we're just systematically staying there and addressing the barriers one by one. It's not just give a cow, give some training, and then move on. And so we can address this holistically, and we can do it as time progresses because the barriers change as time progresses. And by being there for 5 years, we get that opportunity to build those relationships, understand the issues, and kind of address them as they arise. And then we exit after 5 years.
Right. So once you've chosen an area, will you deploy a certain number of people to handle that area over 5 years?
That's correct. So we hire all local staff. Most of the local staff would be from the villages themselves, from those areas themselves, and that creates a sustainability and a knowledge when we leave. So we always hire half of the staff from the village itself, and the other half might come from, the same area. So if it's in Mullaitivu, we'll still hire within Mullaitivu or Klinochi. We're not hiring overseas or from the city to come there. So we hire and build up local capacity, and that's why we also need that time, because these are difficult challenges to overcome. And we also have our offices in those villages. And so we really build up that local presence, and we don't wear uniforms and we don't have Palmera boards. When you go into these villages, you won't see a big NGO sign anywhere. I guess that what we're trying to do is act as facilitators and have people work through these problems themselves, and we just facilitate that process rather than being this big NGO that's, saying we're doing it, don't forget we're doing it. So that's what we're trying to change culturally as well in the way that we work.
Right. And that way, I guess you're more empowering people who live there to be able to eventually handle the problems when you leave in 5 years, right? By not, taking credit and being the big force in the background.
Exactly. And that empowerment happens in so many symbolic, small ways. It's not just an empowerment in the program, but it's how your office looks, how the people are, how they engage, So these are things that we also spend a lot of time thinking about.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. And earlier you mentioned that you started as just a volunteer organization in 2014, and eventually you transitioned into becoming a social enterprise. What did that transition look like? Can you tell me a bit about that? What were the differences, and how do you now operate as a social enterprise?
Well, initially, because the country, Sri Lanka, was largely in war, there was a lot of relief efforts that were needed. So it was largely fundraising. We would fundraise, we would raise some money, we would give it over. So as a volunteer organization, we were just running a lot of events, and we had to mobilize a large amount of people to do that. And what we realized post-war is that the problems are becoming more complex, and we had to get involved more technically, monitoring, designing. And so as a result, the organization shifted, and we built up more technical skills in the organization, development skills around livelihood. Also, we wanted to try to access larger pots of money. So Palmera also gets some money from institutional donors. So we changed kind of the skill mix up in the organization, but we largely still rely on the generosity of people who give us grassroots funding. And what that meant was, one by one, like I quit my job first. And then, sitting in a room, not knowing what to do and how this whole journey starts, the usual startup story. And one by one, slowly, we started putting the pieces together of what is now, we still rely a lot on volunteers, but we have a core staff, and all our staff in Sri Lanka are paid for, are paid staff. We don't have volunteer staff delivering the work. That's because there's a lot of responsibility on them. But of course, all the back end office work that we do in Australia, we try to leverage volunteers because we don't want the donors' money to be spent on that. It is difficult. So when you look at our website, it looks nice, I hope, but all that photography, all that work, all that design is still done by volunteers. So we still have a high dependency on volunteers. But as a startup, and especially as a charity startup, it's very difficult because you're not selling a product. So your revenue stream, most people who want to give you money want to give it for delivery. So it was very difficult for us when we did the transition. We actually created a fund, a growth fund, to support our administration costs. And that's how we made that transition over.
Right, I see. So in the past, we've spotlighted many traditional companies that aren't necessarily social enterprises. So Can you talk us through what the difference might be between a social enterprise like Palmera and a company that someone else might be more like a non-social enterprise?
Yeah. Well, you got to solve the hardest problem in the world, and you can't spend any money doing it. Basically, like, solve poverty. This really difficult social problem. Don't pay any staff. Don't have an office. Don't spend any money on marketing. But it's got to be really good, and you have to have 100% success rate, right? So this is the. These are the conditions in which we work. And look, there are a lot of challenges, right? So salary, how do we attract good staff who we can't pay because people don't want to pay staff, so all these things are really challenging. So we just had to get really creative. Okay, let's create a fund that pays staff, which is separate. And the fund, even when you attract investors to the fund, okay, they don't get a return. They're just doing it because they, feel good, but we want them to feel good and still fund the staff and not fund the people at the end of the day, because we need to develop our product. So I guess everything is different, really. When you can't hire good people and you've got to solve different problems, every single facet of the business has to change, from the way you set up to the way you have to never spend any money on anything that you would need to deliver the product. So how do you do that? And you've got to create really innovative ways. And to be honest, you really rely on people who give their time and are willing to kind of quit jobs and work for no pay. And you really have to rely on that, because how else do you do it? And we deliver our products based on what we have in the team. You can't always do it the other way, because if you want to do all these grand things, if you don't have the people, you're not going to be able to deliver it. So it's a constant reiteration of strategy and, a lot of hard work by a small group of people who are willing to do it, I guess.
Right. So lots and lots of things are different. So
lots and lots of things are different.
Can you zoom in on
not advisable as a
yeah, that's not something you'd expect to hear from the CEO of a social enterprise.
It's a challenge. You've got to be willing to kind of work within the bounds of a social enterprise.
Yeah, 100%. So I'd love to zoom in on one piece that is obviously different. That seems to be very different, actually. Hiring. How does
Yeah.
that look, considering you have such a substantial volunteer population who are doing work that's very integral to operations?
Yeah, so when we hire in Sri Lanka, when we hire is quite different to when we hire in Australia. So when we hire in Sri Lanka, we're really looking. It is easier to hire in Sri Lanka because it is a paid position, but we are looking, but we still don't pay the same as what a large INGO would pay or a good pay would be. So we have people that we try to move over from larger agencies. A lot of our managers have worked for World Visions, and then we negotiate with them and try to get them to come to our organization and try to explain the differences that they would be able to have: more impact, more ownership. You know, they can really control the project. And many people who worked in large agencies then desire that at some point. They desire to have that impact, and they feel, I think, they can have that with Palmera. So we find hiring in Sri Lanka much easier than we do in Australia. When it comes to Australia, the look and feel that we need to have as an organization, there is a high expectation on marketing. And if I give my donation, the receipt should come on time, and then this should happen on time. So we do expect from a small organization something like the big World Visions, and even it's just kind of inbuilt. We don't mean to expect it, but we do. And so hiring in Australia, what we've done is we decided that we largely, from our fund that we've created, we hire experts to do these services. So yeah, look, just changing the people model really in all aspects to make it work.
Right. And so you were talking a bit about larger charities and how, or NGOs, and how, you know, the challenges might be a little bit different.
Yeah.
So how do you see giving changing in the future with respect to causes like yours? In the sense that, do you think that people will continue wanting to give to larger charities and NGOs, or will people maybe lean more towards social enterprises like yours, which are impactful in so many ways?
You know, they say that at a macro level, they say that trend is happening. People like to give to things they know and they can touch and they can feel. I think the main challenge is people still want the transparency and the expectation of the large agency. And so I think there are less agencies that can do both. They can give the heart and the feeling of a small agency, but still give all the, kind of processes and the reports and the look and feels of the large agency. So I think that, it is a little bit about the donor changing the expectations a little bit, and a little bit about the agency ourselves knowing who our target audience is, and kind of sharing a little bit about what we can do and what we can't do and why we can't do it, which means that we need to have deeper relationships. So I think that what will change is that people will have a few causes they get really deep into, and they might be more attached to their giving than before. You kind of give to a lot of things every month and you kind of don't really know what you really give to. But now I feel like there may be a deeper relationship with some of the charities, the fewer charities that people might associate themselves with rather than the breadth. Is my feeling. For Palmera, we really try to create these trusted relationships with our donors. So we have giving circles and, different forms so we can have that relationship while still growing, but still keeping that contact. So even that, we really try to think through how we can do it with minimal resources.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'd love to hear more about how you try to strengthen these relationships that you just mentioned.
So giving circles is one of is kind of one of the big ones that we do, where a group of friends come together and they give, maybe they sponsor a village, but as a group, it might be a group of family members, it might be a group of friends. And then we don't need to meet 10 people, we can meet them over a dinner once a year and then there's 10 people together. But then through the year, when those 10 meet each other, they're kind of continuing that relationship in some way, and they're bonded by the conversation that we had when we all met up once a year for dinner. As well, of course, we give them a lot of updates. We use technology a lot, so we kind of use WhatsApp and different kind of digital ways of communicating. We use video a lot. So we're trying to target those communications and try to group people around these giving circles so we can kind of give people the kind of material they want. Because when you put something on Facebook or social media, you don't know who it's going to get to, if anyone, given the changing algorithms every day. So it's kind of hard to get through the noise, So we find as a small agency, those relationships is what has allowed us to grow over the years. Without putting a fundraising person in our organization, we don't hire any fundraising person in our organization.
Right. And I just saw a question pop up from someone in our audience, Roshan. So Roshan asks, how do you and your team go about forming new ideas and validating whether or not to pursue them?
So a lot of it happens on the ground with a lot of multi-dimensional stakeholders. So right now we're trying to think through a problem around women facing sexual violence. And so when we're having these conversations about this problem, it might go on for 6 months, and we're engaging so many different stakeholders in that conversation. It's people who've worked in that area, it's government stakeholders, it's experts, it's people in large NGOs, it's just everyone having conversation, what's worked, what's not worked, why is it working? And through that, we then look at literature and best practice and what's happening in other parts of the world. And through those conversations, which has some structure because someone will be project managing that piece of work, we can then come to a solution design. So I guess some people know it as like human design principles, or, that's how it's kind of used in the corporate world, but it's really having empathy for the problem, deeply understanding the problem, and then thinking about what has happened in the past, what hasn't worked, what happens in other places, and then trial and error through the solution design. So when we implement the project, we always have phased pilot testing processes. And the way we measure that is through, indicators and monitoring, and then discussions around did it work and did it not work. So Palmera has invested quite heavily in our monitoring system to make sure we can do that.
Yeah. So just to help me better wrap my head around it, do you think you could give a specific example of a new project, a new idea, and then the process in which that went through?
Yeah, so one of the programs we run is called Gradually Most Vulnerable. While it's very low in Sri Lanka, absolute poverty, which is people who live below $1.50 a day, is quite low in Sri Lanka. I think it's like 2% or something. And we have a program that specifically targets that group of people. And that was a program that we identified in Bangladesh. That is an evidence-based program that's working really well. So we then hired people to learn about that program. We knew that problem was in Sri Lanka, and then we were trying to think what's the best solution to address that. So first we looked at evidence-based that's happening around the world. There was a program that was very successful in Bangladesh, and we learned about it. Then we took that program to a lot of different local stakeholders, NGOs, governments, and others who've been working on that, working with this group of people who don't have, who are unable to eat 3 times a day. It's a structured program that has a lot of evidence base around it. People discussed it, and then we adapted it to the local context with this multi-stakeholder group over a 3 or 4 month process. We then trialed it with 100 people in Quinochi. So it was a very focused trial, and we did it for a year. And over a year, we had indicators, and we mapped whether we saw people graduating out of from not being able to eat 3 times a day to being able to eat 3 times a day. When we saw some successes and some failures, we then had interim steps, and we adapted and changed the program. And now we're pretty confident with the program. And so we then scaled it to another 200 people, and then we'll keep scaling it out, because we keep learning more. And there's always adaptations that you'll need to do that are localized. So it's kind of a structured project. So we don't just come in and say, we're going to help 1,000 people and we're just going to figure it out as we go. It's kind of using evidence-based discussions, testing, and then the program develops itself. It's still in principles, you still have to apply it, and there's always kind of adaptations that occur as we go through. Right,
that's really interesting. So there's a very structured way in which which you use to tackle different problems and increase success. That's very interesting.
And Palmera only works on income and livelihood, so we're not doing health and education. So we do have a built experience and technical expertise around that area. So we only focus on living income or livelihood, different groups like people with disability or women facing violence. It still is the ultimate aim about that thematic area. So if someone came to me tomorrow and said, how do you get people to go into university in Sri Lanka, I wouldn't have as much built experience on that as I do in this area, and my team has in this area.
Right, that makes sense. I think just the story of how you got started is so fascinating, so interesting. So many people will have some idea or will be more inclined to, do a traditional startup, a tech startup. And you think startup, you think Silicon Valley, Mark Zuckerberg, right? I think very few people think of trying to meaningfully create social impact. So maybe somewhere in a different part of the world. So I think it would be really interesting for you to share some advice for people who want to create impact, but don't really know how they would go about starting a social enterprise and going about it.
Look, I think you have to get experience first in some sector, because it's very hard when you do a startup to learn skills by yourself. It's kind of a slow process. So if you're really interested in an impact area, my advice would be go work for an NGO or go work in that thematic area and learn, because now, I sit in an office while I'm learning, I learn in a different way. You don't get as much technical skills and mentorship and guidance in that way that you would in a company. So my strong advice is to first get experience in the areas that you're interested in. Go work in a country for 2 years and be on the ground and learn, so you don't make the mistakes when the pressure is on you to deliver, because it's harder to solve the problems at that point. If someone's giving you a lot of money and you've got to deliver it and you don't know how to deliver it, you might not get their funding again. So the stakes are kind of on when you've done your own thing. So, I did this after 10 years of working in this space. I also did it very reluctantly. It wasn't my intention to do this, being kind of Tamil origin and Sri Lankan. My family was very active in the humanitarian efforts, and I guess I just felt a little compelled as I was kind of going through my career and I was solving other social problems. I felt maybe I should be doing this in Sri Lanka. So if I guess you have to follow your heart a little bit, and sometimes causes find you, you don't find the cause. And then I think it's about really broadening your network. A lot relies on your own network, and so you have to be out there having cold calls, meeting every single person who will talk to you, because you don't know later when that would kind of come to fruition. So whether it's donors, whether it's advice, whether it's getting people to do free stuff, you've got to be able to feel comfortable to have those type of conversations. And look, lastly, you've got to have a really supportive partner because, for those who may, I've got 2 kids and I'm married, and, it's challenging as a woman to do this work. And, men also have different social pressures. And I think you've got to really think holistically if you're going to be starting a social startup, because you may need to change some of life as well, and, if you have a supportive partner, that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. So you've been involved in this kind of space for a while. You said 10 years. So
Yeah.
what encouraged you to stay in that space when I'm sure, you probably had many other options that could have probably been more lucrative? Why did you stay in that space and decide very early on that, you'd want to go on? Maybe you didn't know you'd end up at Palmera, but you chose this trajectory very early on.
After the tsunami experience, I still wanted to stay in corporate and I still wanted to earn money, definitely.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do Palmera and do a small startup, definitely not at that point. I just thought I could do a bit of both in a way. I could still be in the corporate environment, I could still do things. And for me, and everyone has a different journey, as you be in that middle space, you kind of tip one way or tip the other way. It's pretty hard to stay in the middle for a long time, I think. And so while I was in companies and working on shared value, there was a desire for me to know that it worked. And, well, I think we could do this, but we can't because we're kind of constrained by the company construct, and so I just kept tipping slowly over, and then I was trying to resist the tip, and then I would tip, and like any startup, I guess any founder just goes through a bit of a yo-yo for a period, and then I think eventually the work just became too much. There was just, Palmera was kind of starting up on the side, and there was just too much work to do both my day job and to make sure Palmera would be successful. And then there was a clean break from work, which had me then tip over.
Yeah, the break would do that.
Yeah.
At what moment did you know that there was something here, and Palmera wasn't just a side hustle anymore. What made you realize that there was something worth betting on and jumping in?
Gosh, I don't know if I knew that. I think I felt there was in Australia, Sri Lankans are one of the highest earning per capita in New South Wales. It's a professional community that earns a lot of money. And I just felt I had to try. So I don't think I knew that it would be successful. I just thought, let me just try to mobilize funds. I thought I would do it for 2 years and then I would set it up and then everything will be set up and then I'll just go back to my job. And 6 years later, it didn't quite work out like that. So I think it was a bit of naivety and a bit of duty that had me started. I think now I can see that while it's difficult to mobilize a lot of people for fundraising and a lot of people to volunteer, the group that we do have mobilized, I feel like we can do something with this. When I look at the projects we do and the funds we have, I can see the value it adds, and that is what has me kind of continue to do it.
Right. And now I'd love to, learn more about you. We've talked about your story, which is amazing, but I'd love for our audience to get to know you a bit more. So, you have this crazy work life. For a period of time, you were balancing a full-time job and Palmera and eventually make the switch, but undoubtedly crazy work life. What do you do to unwind?
Well, I have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old at the moment. So when I'm not working and I'm not looking after these 2 crazy kids, there's actually right now, it's not as glamorous as it once was, which unwinding is like sneaking so no one can see me and I can get into a little part of my room where no one's going to open the door for 10 minutes, and I can read a book. I crave silence at the moment. That's my unwind time. But yeah, it's just the season of craziness with life that I'm in at the moment. That's probably dictating that.
10 minutes of silence. That's fair.
10 minutes, just 10 minutes, 10 minutes. When I don't need to work and I don't need to deal with children. I don't cook, cooking and cleaning. Oh gosh.
And also this is hosted for a Tamil audience, or your Tamil. Yeah. So what is your favorite Tamil food?
I love puttu, and my dad makes a mean puttu kottu. Oh. And we live in Australia, we live where a lot of Sri Lankans live. And so we have all the Sri Lankan restaurants right around us. So, my kids are asking for the rolls and asking for all the Sri Lankan food. So we're around it all the time, but I can't go past puttu. Just puttu an egg,
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. It's classic. And this is a bit more general. If you had $1 billion that you could spend towards any cause in any way, how would you spend that money?
You know what I would do? I would put it all in a trust, right? And then just have it, the interest, just funds, work, obviously Palmera, but also I'm really passionate about women facing kind of physical and sexual violence, because I just think that I see a lot of that in the work that we do in Sri Lanka, and I think that is such a that space for me, and it is just so, there's no words to express. So I think any organization that's working to empowering women who don't need to be in those situations, like in Sri Lanka where we work, in the communities that we went to, there was such a high percentage of people that were going to the Middle East to work as domestic workers. In Saudi, the highest import of domestic workers come from Sri Lanka. And, to see in our communities 15, 20% of women leaving as domestic workers because they needed to pay for their family, and now they don't need to because they have opportunity, has just had me become really passionate about that issue. So that's the cause, I guess, I would direct funds to. But I would do it in a way that I never need to fundraise again. I would just set it up, always set up money well. That's my big learning of fundraising after all these years.
Yeah, I'm trying to run a social enterprise, solve the world's greatest problems with no money. That's amazing. And kind of looking back on the past 6 years spent building Palmera, do you have a favorite memory from this experience that will always stick with you?
I don't reflect much on the journey, and maybe it's just my personality, or, you know, it's just, you don't always do it in the first early years of life. But we started taking over donors to the village. We call it the village experience. And once a year, we take donors across, and we just did it in February, and we take 10 or 15 people across. And that has become my favorite, like a really favorite memory of mine, because watching other people we stay in the village, you know, we bathe in the wells and, you know, squat on toilets, and watching, whether it's young people or older people who've engaged with us, seeing the impact that they've had, and kind of watching, I guess I can't do it anymore because I'm just too involved in the operations, but I can see it through their eyes. And that has me see these different facets of the work that I don't know if I could appreciate myself anymore, because I just see all the detail. But recently in January, one of the ladies was talking to one of our donors, and I just saw these tears fall down her eyes. And I don't know, it's just really amazing to see how we can all work together to kind of create this, you know, impact. So that's been nice.
That's amazing. And I think it all started with an idea you had or started working on 6 years ago. Yeah. Do you ever reflect on that and think of how crazy it is that it all started with an idea you had at some point in time?
You know, because it wasn't an idea by one person, you know, it was a group of people that just was chatting, and it almost evolved so organically that I guess I don't always think about back to the beginning. But I always remember, and I tell the story a lot for those who've heard me speak in Australia, but when I was in Sri Lanka, when the tsunami hit, and I was a younger girl back then, and at that time, people didn't know, it was still in the midst of war, though it was at ceasefire time. People didn't know where their loved ones were. They didn't know that it was a tsunami. And we were in a vehicle. And so thousands of people were lined up on the streets, and people were jumping into the car trying to find out who their loved ones was, where their loved ones were. And I guess the memory I always think about when I think about the beginning was one of the ladies who jumped in and had obviously lost all her family members. Back then, I couldn't speak a word of Tamil. And you know, all she did was she just held onto my hand, and the way she held onto my hand, you know, it was just so, it was indescribable. I think even if I think about it too long now, it would make me cry. And I think that's that moment, that human connection moment, kind of keeps me going when I think, oh, what's the point? Or there's just no point doing it. So that's, I guess, if I do think about it, that's the thing I think about. But the idea wasn't by one person or in one moment. That idea of what Palmera has become and what it will become has just kind of kept evolving. But it all began, I think, with that desire to help, I guess.
Right. Yeah. And maybe going out a bit more general. So how do you feel that how do you feel about, just generally, the state of philanthropic efforts within the Tamil community?
I don't know what other parts of the world are like in Canada and America, but I can only talk for Australia. Most of our funds come from Australia through Handmade the Cookbook. We get support, and through some of our appeals that we do. And of course, there are exceptions where some people outside of Australia jump on and support us. To date, most of our funds have come from Australia. And, you know, it's difficult. People in Australia came much earlier. And those who are doing well are probably a little bit more disconnected from their Sri Lankan heritage or their Sri Lankan identity. So it is difficult to engage. And so Palmera has spent a lot of time and effort to try to look like an organisation that people would want to engage with. And yeah, once you engage people, you've got them engaged, you know. But in Australia, we have to have the identity conversation first before we can get the funds. So it's a little bit more of a longer journey. But once people give, they give for a long time.
Right. Yeah. And kind of expanding from that, what's one way that myself or anybody watching can get involved in what Palmera is doing? Because you are doing some absolutely incredible stuff.
You know, there's so many ways to get involved. Of course, you can just jump on the website. We try to crowdfund a lot of our projects. So you can jump on the website, pick a project, crowdfund to it. We're trying to be really mindful of giving a lot of updates. If you fundraise, if you give to a particular project, you can become a monthly giver. But one really easy way, and something we're really trying to get people mobilized around, is you pledge your birthday. So if you go to our website and you go to get involved, so www.palmera.org, you go get involved, there's a link and it says start up a campaign. And if you have a birthday, and instead of having getting people to give you gifts, if you're having a dinner, you say, hey, just whatever you want to give to this link. And just so much money can be raised that way, with quite little effort. And if you jump online, you can see there's heaps of people that have already done that. So I guess, pledge a birthday would be the easiest one to do. But for those who don't want to do that, you can make a donation, or you can email us, and if there's a specialized skill that you have that you want to support us with, you can email us and we can kind of see whether that could work as well.
And before we end off, in the spirit of reflection, let's pretend that you could go back in time and give 16-year-old you any advice. What would you tell yourself?
Oh, gosh, a lot of things. I would say a lot of things, but, I would say that, there's a season for everything, and, you just have to wait out certain seasons, and, there's a season to be patient, I guess, and know that seasons will end, and tough times will end, and good times will end, and, if you have your heart in the right place, will eventually take you to where you need to go.
Keep your heart in the right place and you'll end up where you need to go.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. I wasn't expecting it for it to get this profound, but it did. That's amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for being involved with us today, Abarna. Thank you to our audience. Thank you so much for tuning in. And at the beginning, I mentioned to everyone that we would have a special perk for incredible audience members who stuck around till the end. So that perk is access to a really cool form, a tool. I'm putting the link in the chat. And those who fill out the form will be randomly selected for a chance to win free swag. So fill out the form, you might win free stuff. If you like free stuff, do that. That'll take 2 minutes. Once again, I'd like to thank all the amazing people who made this event possible, from Shiv and Ara at Tamil Culture, to Abarna. So first of all, be sure to check out tamilculture.com to network and collaborate with Tamil innovators across the world. Abarna's on there, I'm on there. Be sure to check that out. Also, thank you again for Abarna for being involved in this event. We can't thank you enough for tuning in and sharing your story. You're doing some amazing stuff. So for everybody who's watching, please go to palmera.org right now to learn more about what they're doing, and also get involved. Go to the site, press get involved, and pledge a birthday today. Thank you so much for joining in. This has been an amazing event. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks.